Hey folks, this is Rob Ager of CollativeLearning.com, now posting for the first time in HD video thanks to my new super fast editing system. Well, last week I've been working on a study of the filmmaking style of Francis Ford Coppola, when I thought, I'm going to sit down this evening and watch something simple and fun. How about the old classic Twilight Zone the movie? Now, I'd been a big fan of the film since I first saw it back in 1983. I was 10 years old at the time. And like pretty much everyone else, I always thought the third and fourth episodes of the film's four-story structure were by far the best. However, as much as I adore the John Lithgow piece about the gremlin trying to cause a plane crash, which is most people's favourite episode in the film, I've always been in the small minority who think that the third story is the best. The nightmare surrealist piece about a kid who has some sort of magical power of will, whereby he can make literally anything happen just by wishing for it. Now, this video isn't going to be an attempt to persuade people that the third episode is better than the fourth one. They're both amazing pieces of filmmaking, and their subject matter and tones are so different that I think it's a pointless discussion. In fact, I might even make a separate video about the fourth episode, or even the entire movie. But what recently struck me about the third episode is just how unbelievably intricate it is, and how much it can teach us about the filmmaking craft itself. In fact, it's so good that I was compelled to shelve all my other projects for a couple of weeks and make this analysis which you're now watching. The episode is called It's a Good Life, and it's a remake of one of the old black and white Twilight Zone episodes of the same name. But it's so different to the original that I consider it loosely inspired by rather than a direct remake. For those of you who've never seen Twilight Zone the movie, I'll first briefly outline the plot of It's a Good Life. A young woman, Helen, is searching for a purpose in life. She's befriended by a young boy, Anthony, and gives him a ride home, where she is coerced by the boy and his weird family into exploring the surreally decorated house and then staying for supper. Gradually she finds out that the supposed family are just other visitors brought to the house like Helen and who are now held captive by Anthony. It turns out that the boy has some sort of supernatural mind power by which he can make anything happen just by wishing for it. Reality is gradually turned upside down as his powers are revealed, but Helen manages to break through Anthony's barriers of loneliness-fueled anger. She decides to dedicate her life to helping him control his powers, and he gladly accepts that offer. Okay, that's the basic plot. But the episode is one of those rare pieces of filmmaking that hits all the right buttons in terms of straight commercial entertainment value, but is also incredibly detailed, original, and inventive in the artistic sense. Hence, this analysis is going to be about twice the length of the episode itself. I'm not kidding, I rate this episode right up there among the works of Hitchcock, Kubrick and David Lynch. Everything in this episode is of the highest calibre: script, acting, set design, cinematography, lighting, editing, sound effects, music. It's an absolute knockout. Yet it has a lot of marvellous things that are easy to miss, like the intricate parallels between old cartoon footage and the story itself, subtle suggestions about character histories, thematic use of light, colour and continuity errors, and a lot more. So we're going to explore all these features and how they interact with each other to create a 26-minute film that relentlessly bombards the viewer with subtle conceptual and emotional triggers, and manages to cram into that 26-minute runtime a story and character arc that has the epic feel of a quality feature film. So let's first examine the script, characters and general story structure. The film immediately saves itself a lot of time wasting by not even bothering to try and justify or explain why Anthony has the ability to make physically impossible things happen. There's no boring dialogue about ESP or alternate dimensions, and by placing no limitations on what Anthony can do, the film is free to delve into surrealism and dream logic in a way that would feel ridiculous in almost any other movie. Ironically, Inception used the approach of not trying to scientifically explain how characters could enter each other's dreams, yet the filmmakers severely restricted themselves in terms of how surreal they were willing to take things. For me, it was one of the most disappointing aspects of that film. Anthony's magical power allows the film to make very fast story progressions from one scene to the next without having to waste time imitating reality. For example, once Helen establishes her willingness to discipline Anthony, the other characters and the house itself become irrelevant. So Anthony just wishes them away, and we move immediately on to the scene of the two central characters discussing their mutual future. And following this, the idea that through their relationship, the world itself is going to be transformed for the better is communicated quickly and simply. Anthony fills the surrounding desertscape with flowers as they drive through it. That's a huge implication about the future ahead of them, communicated in about 15 seconds, and it leaves us wondering, is this kid going to end all wars, eradicate poverty forever, and turn the world into a utopian paradise? Or will he eventually regress? So the film manages to wrap up its epic ending in the space of just a couple of minutes, facilitated by the plot convenience of unrestricted magic. So that's an important lesson in script writing, having a plot device that justifies severe deviations away from audience expectations of reality allows for tighter and more efficient scene progression. Another story feature that is marvellously well done is how the film gradually and incrementally takes us from everyday reality to all-out surrealness, but without it feeling forced. There's a lot to this, so bear with me. Although the diner scene at the beginning appears normal, Helen's first line of dialogue hints that she has already entered some unknown realm.
Okay, I give up. Where am I?
That's a nice simple metaphor that she is lost both in purpose and in connection to reality itself. Helen gives Anthony a ride home after the diner scene and everything appears all normal in their conversation, but we get visual clues of unreality as the car approaches the house. The other cars are covered in dirt and some have their engine hoods left open. These more than likely belong to the people already imprisoned in the house, and the amount of dirt on the vehicles suggests that those people have been trapped there for years. The house itself looks like something out of a Tom and Jerry cartoon, and the identical cartoon house we see on the TV set in the lounge a moment later appears to have been created for the film, while the cat and dog fight has been edited in from an old cartoon called Mouse Wreckers. So the house comparison is the first blatant visual clue that physical reality is now giving way to cartoon reality, where anything is possible. The simplistic colours and furniture inside the home are like something out of an old cartoon, but not too obviously. Then we get the really weird, overwhelming behaviour from the family, which isn't a break from physical reality, but it is a break from normality. And that's a clever way of easing us into the much more jarring transitions that are about to follow. Helen goes upstairs with Anthony, and here's where things get really interesting visually. First, who the hell puts a TV right at the top of the stairs, and leaves it on when no one is watching? So again, not physically impossible, but definitely not normal. Anthony and Helen step into a hall where a TV is showing a clip from an old black and white cartoon called Bimbo's Initiation. The original cartoon is fascinating and highly relevant to Helen's dilemma, but we'll come back to that later. For now, note that the cartoon is black and white and the house decor has also suddenly turned into black and white, another indication that cartoon reality is taking over. The doors within doors content of the clip is also literally mirrored in the set by the fact that when the camera pulls out, we discover that we were watching not the TV, but a reflection of it in a mirror. Hence, in the original cartoon, Bimbo was on the other side of the door. And there's another TV playing the same clip in the background and completely in sync with the first TV. Again, fractal reality. Now this is a part I consider really clever. Helen enters the hallway, and it's lit with completely unrealistic stripes of light from above shining at lots of different angles, and she sees a cartoon-like family photo with blank faces, and the family standing in front of striped wallpaper and on a striped carpet, as if surrounded by prison cell bars. Which also suggests that the striped lighting of the grey hall itself represents a prison that Helen is now trapped in. These visual factors really ought to be freaking Helen out and motivating her to escape the house, but she hardly seems fazed by it. She doesn't even look up to see why the lighting is so odd. And what I love about that is that it messes with our perceptions as viewers. Are the cartoon elements of the house fully visible to Helen? Or are they just there to let us know that Helen has blindly walked into a cartoon prison world? It implies that the details we're seeing in this house are representative, not literal. You see how clever the film is and how it incrementally draws us away from reality? And that nicely bridges the gap to the film's first absolute deviation from physical reality, Anthony's sister, Sarah, having no mouth. And we aren't even given an explanation of this until much later.
Maybe he'll get mad at you, like he did to his real sister, and cripple you and take away your mouth so you won't be able to yell at him anymore.
However, her mouthless appearance was sort of foreshadowed by the faceless figures in the picture a moment earlier. So now that the line of physical impossibility has been crossed, the film can get on with having Anthony openly display his powers. But it still continues with the incremental approach. There's the implied magical creation of dinner.
Darling, do you remember where supper is?
You know where it is.
Then the very clever use of an old cartoon clip in which a character explains his ability to do anything he can think of. Anthony and Helen match the cartoon characters in terms of visual framing, so it's like Anthony is using the cartoon to tell Helen and us about his abilities. After Anthony's obviously psychic flipping of Ethel's dinner, which is just the standard ESP stuff we'd expect in typical supernatural horrors, the film makes another clever conceptual shift. Instead of jumping straight into making cartoons physically come to life, Anthony instead makes Walt do a magic trick. That's a great incremental bridge because we're all accustomed to seeing magicians make the impossible appear possible. The hat appearing on the TV out of nowhere gets things started, and it's the first time that we see Helen genuinely afraid. So, Walt does his rabbit trick, a standard magic routine that we're accustomed to, but we know and Helen knows that this really is magic. So things are getting pretty unnerving, but now the film suddenly abandons its incremental ease-you-in approach and goes straight into all-out shock surrealism.
No, I swear to you, you'll like it.
Finally, cartoons have become flesh. Now that this total unreality line has finally been crossed, the characters are free to openly state the fantasy dilemma in dialogue without losing audience engagement.
I can make it real nice here. I can make the food just the way you said it should be. I can even change the house. Just say it and I can make whatever you like.
But there's one last reality to unreality transition that needs to be made, and that is to establish that the external, real world has disappeared completely. And the film does this in two steps. First by having Anthony put Ethel into a cartoon and chase to her death, and then the external world outside the house is entirely removed in a superb visual shock moment. Reality is now utterly gone, and Anthony can go wild with his powers. Now it may seem like I've spent an awful lot of time talking about this reality to unreality journey, but it is one hell of a narrative achievement. In approximately 20 minutes, the film has gone from a normal everyday diner scene to an insane surrealist nightmare, while keeping even adult audiences fully engaged in the story. Something else that works in the film's favour is the fact that Anthony is a child of what, maybe 9 years of age? This achieves several things in terms of audience appeal. It makes the film watchable for kids because they would love to have Anthony's powers, both to do anything and to create and destroy terrifying monsters at will. And his age also facilitates simplistic childlike dialogue that any viewer can understand. So when Helen explains the moral and philosophical dilemma to Anthony near the end of the movie, there doesn't need to be an intellectual monologue as there would be if she were talking to a late teenager or an adult. She states the situation in short and simple terms, and we accept it because she's talking to a kid. So despite the incredible subtlety in some aspects of the film, the basic plot and relationships can easily be understood by all viewers. In other areas, the filmmakers include subtleties which aren't necessary, but add more plot and character depth and, ironically, realism for older and more observant viewers. For example, the opening narration that introduces Helen tells us nothing about her history except that she is a schoolteacher by occupation. That's important in itself, of course, because it predisposes her toward Anthony's needs. But the intro narration tells us nothing else about Helen except that she's bored with her life. So, the wild adventure of meeting Anthony will have its appeals. So her history seems to be a blank canvas, but there are other aspects of Helen's history and mindset. Her car is full of belongings, so she's obviously moving home or is living on the roads while looking for somewhere she wants to stay. And her conversation with the diner owner implies that she really doesn't like the town that she's from.
Where are you from?
Homewood.
Nice town.
Do you say so?
Hello.
But she's also a very attractive woman. So, why no love interest? Well, this is also hinted at in her conversation with the diner owner. He's obviously trying to hit on her, and she's onto him immediately and is really uncomfortable about it, as if he's struck a raw nerve. So I'll bet she's had some bad experiences with men. In fact, she may have even given up on them. The diner guy is called away to speak to his wife on the phone, and Helen sarcastically emphasises the point.
Hey, Walter, it's your wife.
Your wife.
So maybe Helen was with a guy who had an affair, or maybe she was with someone who turned out to be married. She definitely was involved with someone, because when Anthony's fake family rummaged through her bag, they find photos of Helen at the beach, looking happy and romantically involved with a man. For some reason she's no longer with this guy, yet she still keeps the photos in her bag. I think it's safe to say that she's had her heart broken and still hasn't gotten over it. Back in the diner scene, I noticed another detail that might be a deliberate implication about Helen now bearing a grudge against men generally. She obviously disliked the owner's attitude, and in her farewell she implies that the attitudes of the guys in this bar are the very same reason that she left her hometown in the first place.
Forget about the sandwich. No charge.
Terrific. Nice town.
But when she intervenes against the idiot who pushes Anthony away from the arcade machine, she stares at him with scorn while the two of them are framed against toilet door signs that emphasise their gender difference. It's really subtle, but absolutely relevant. Her general politeness is also important. She dislikes rudeness and insensitivity, which no doubt makes her feel separate from an immature world around her, just as Anthony feels separated. But her politeness also makes her more willing to play along with the strangeness of Anthony's family when she meets them. Personally, I'm not so polite. I think if I met these people, I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Another factor here is that Anthony is male, and if Helen has a bad view of men in general, then this provides extra motivation for her to make sure that he doesn't grow up to be like other irresponsible men. And at the same time, she has no kids and seems unlikely to have them if she can no longer connect with men romantically. So, by meeting Anthony, she bypasses marriage and acquires motherhood anyway. The bonding between a parent and child is a powerful thing generally, so it creates a very strong emotional framing to the story. Sure, the episode is surreal as hell visually, but that stuff is incidental. The heart of the story is the mother-son, teacher-pupil bond that emerges for the two main characters. Two lost souls who save each other. So that's another important lesson in filmmaking. Make the emotional journeys and relationships feel realistic, and the audience will then be much more likely to accept any fantastical deviations from physical reality that are found elsewhere in the story. Regarding Anthony himself, there are several features that I find interesting. He's clearly an intelligent kid, intelligent beyond his years, and he understands what is happening in the minds of adults. Sure, in the original episode the kid was a mind reader, but I think in the remake episode he's just very intelligent and observant, like any normal clever kid, rather than being a magical mind reader. And there's a difference in that in the original episode the kid was younger and didn't appear intellectually gifted. Now I like those changes in the new version because it kind of carries a suggestion that Anthony's magical powers over the physical world are basically a metaphor for him being one of those super gifted genius kids who have trouble growing up because they relate to the world differently than other kids, and are sometimes even smarter than the adults around them, including their school teachers. The film can also be taken as being a metaphor about parenting generally. It's certainly true that kids who are never disciplined or are lied to and unloved can turn out to be monsters later in life. Note that there's a paradox between Anthony's magical abilities and his level of self-control. His punishment of Ethel just for calling him a monster is brutal, but did he do this out of uncontrolled spite, or was he making an ironic point, as if saying, hey Ethel, if you choose to see me as a monster, then I may as well live up to your expectation, you've earned it. So she gets chased and eaten by a stereotypical monster. The scene is important because it shows the danger of what Anthony might do to the world itself if he remains lonely and frustrated, so it's sort of an omen of a nightmare future. But back in the diner scene it's suggested that Anthony is very in control of his abilities. He allows himself to be pushed to the floor by a grown man, and unlike with Ethel, he does absolutely nothing back to him. He totally controlled his temper in a way that most adults wouldn't be able to do. And at the end of the film it's left open to interpretation as to whether he actually freed the other captives in the house, or killed them.
The others?
I sent them where they wanted to go. Away from me.
As for the two instances of him creating cartoon monsters, he obviously did the second one deliberately to demonstrate his powers to Helen and test his relationship with her. Hence the creature just pulls crazy faces instead of actually attacking. But what about the rabbit? Was this something that popped up spontaneously from his subconscious? Or did he manipulatively do this to terrify Helen because she was determined to leave the house? My guess is it was deliberate, being that he finds the creature amusing and is able to wish it away instantly after he's made his point. So, like Hannibal Lecter, Anthony has a monster side and a polite, respectful side, depending on who he's dealing with. He's really polite and civilized to Helen throughout most of the film because he respects her honesty, caring nature, and her courage in attempting to give him some healthy discipline.
You're young, you need your nutrition. You can't eat like this all the time.
Time for you to go now, Ethel.
Don't. Wish it away, Anthony. Wish it away. Let's not do too much more of that, okay?
Sure.
There was a hint of this forthcoming parental discipline when Anthony dropped his coat on the floor.
Anthony.
By contrast, the rest of the fake family, terrifying as the situation is, are self-interested cowards. They're scared to even discuss Anthony's attitude with him. They raid Helen's handbag and show a nastier side with each other when Anthony isn't around. And 3 of them hand Ethel to Anthony on a plate for the slaughter. So it's like they partially deserve their victim status. At the very least, we can understand why Anthony doesn't respect them. Now, I don't know about you, but I find films in which people are definitively good or evil with no grey areas and no historical complexities to be generally boring as hell. But Anthony is fascinating. He's lovable and smart, yet he crippled his sister and killed Ethel and, well, we'll have to guess what he did to his parents.
Or maybe he'll do to you what he did to his real mother and father.
Time for you to go now, Ethel.
Apparently what he did was worse than crippling them, and maybe it can't be shown because younger viewers would be so disturbed by it. They're almost certainly dead. Maybe they're even faceless. And the mystery of what he did to his parents brings me to another filmmaking lesson that this episode conveys so well. To make a story engaging and convincing, it's important to surround the overt plot with unknowns, references to things, people and events that we never actually get to witness. It gives the impression of a larger reality, and it certainly gives rewatch value if there are hidden plot details waiting to be discovered upon repeated viewings. So there's the mystery of the parents we never see and the implications of Helen being heartbroken. But there are other questions that remain unanswered. How old was Anthony when his abilities kicked in? How long ago did he get rid of his parents? What kind of people were they? What kind of person was his sister before he crippled her? Did she deserve it? Was his family abusive, or did they struggle to nurture him? How old is he really? Does he grow at a normal rate? How long have his replacement family been in the house? Who arrived first, and how did Anthony lure them there? How old is Ethel really, being that the actress who played her was in her mid-20s? And what would the typical day in the house be like if Helen wasn't visiting? Does Anthony torment these people daily with cartoon monsters made flesh? Their advanced fear of the hat-trick monster suggests that he does.
Isn't it fun? We do it a lot.
Yeah, you'll love it here, really.
Like it,
You'll love
really, I promise.
No, I swear to you.
So what else? Well, another superb feature of this episode's general story structure is that it switches between different filmmaking genres several times. So we start off with a straightforward relationship drama, which then changes into a sort of offbeat situation comedy as Helen interacts with the family. It becomes a suspense mystery piece as she discovers the abnormality of the house and its occupants, and it becomes near enough all-out horror when the monsters appear and when Ethel is killed. Ethel's death has to be one of the most nightmarish things I've ever seen in a movie, but the film presents it in cartoon form, which makes the scene more palatable for young viewers. And after all that, the film gives a totally unexpected, sentimental, happy ending. The story consistently surprises the viewer with its huge shifts in genre style, and I can think of very few other films that do this so quickly and with such extreme contrast. In fact, I'd say that's an important key in filmmaking. People are generally familiar with the standard narratives defined within individual genres, So if you want to really surprise them, make a story that morphs in and out of different genres as it progresses. Humour is also used at many points to lighten the tone regarding the sufferings of the trapped family members, and that's a wise choice because their scenario is pretty terrifying.
It was her.
No, it wasn't me.
No, her, Ethel.
Oh,
Ethel.
it must have been Ethel. Of course,
Yeah.
it had to have been Ethel. That's right.
Yes, Ethel. There you are. It was Ethel. That's fine.
Oh, great.
And I love Anthony's cartoon reference one-liner to round off Ethel's death scene. But director Joe Dante also explained to Fangoria about his movie Gremlins that humour can be used to soften up the audience, to disarm them so that when the horror comes it's more of a shock. He also makes the clever point that people tend to find things to laugh at in horror movies anyway because horror movies are generally absurd, and that by giving them moments that are intentionally funny, it distracts them from laughing at the moments where they're meant to be scared. Okay, so that wraps up my study of the overall story structure. But there's still plenty to explore concerning the film's finer details, and again this is really important stuff for filmmakers, so let's move on. So let's begin with set design and props. We've already gone partially into this regarding the gradual shift from reality to cartoon insanity, but there are lots of extra details that can easily be missed. The faceless family pictures upstairs are made obvious, but they were actually present on the hallway set too, but far less prominently. Note that there's a colour version of the black and white family portrait too. Remember the fractal door in the cartoon? Well, here we see a painted cartoon hallway of fractal doors, paralleling the cartoon. In the kitchen we briefly see in a few shots that the exterior world is actually just a flat cartoon image. In other shots of the living room windows, which incidentally don't match the exterior of the house, we see nothing of the outside world. The windows appear to be painted plain blue. But for a moment we do see that a painting of the outside suddenly appears in one window. It appears to show a cartoon winter exterior, even though it was summer when Helen entered the house. Just before the Tasmanian Devil comes out of the TV, there's a cartoonish mouse hole in the wall with an actual door, just like in the old Tom and Jerry cartoons. The upstairs maze of the hallway makes no sense spatially compared to the house exterior or the stairway, and there seems to be no windows upstairs. The pink chair that gets picked up here seems to have just appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't there when they first entered the house. Continuity error? Maybe. Another curious detail is the colour-tinted window panes around the front door. They're mostly a sort of twilight blue, giving the impression of a different time of day. Hey Helen, you just entered the Twilight Zone. And in several shots there are slightly creepy shadows of tree branches on these windows, even though there were no trees directly outside the house. And one detail that illustrates that there was actually some proper thought that went into the colours of these windows is that when Helen runs to the door only to be faced by Anthony's giant eye, the window panes suddenly have different colours that match his eye. Dark in the centre for the pupils, surrounded by pink and white, as if the windows are a pair of eyes. She shuts the door and the windows are suddenly blue again. Now you may be thinking, hey, he's reading a bit too much into this, but these are constructed sets, so each detail had to be decided on and created. For example, the dark chandelier with the candle bulbs. It looks more like something out of a traditional horror set. And in some shots we see a big dark set of doors that make no sense because from outside the house we can see that those doors would have to open directly to the outside. Yet the bottom of the door shows that there is only darkness behind it, like a secret or forbidden place. There's also supposed to be a small window just to the side of the front door, but once we're inside, it isn't there. The fireplace in the lounge also appears to be blocked off. And there are some more odd, creepy pictures upstairs. One of a cat sneaking along a wall outside the house at night, and a picture of a boy approaching a door as Anthony approaches the stairs where we see the fractal doors. The rows of identical teddies in identical beds is another strange feature. I'm not sure what that's meant to imply, but perhaps it's a sort of notion that the people in the house are effectively Anthony's toys or teddies. Note that although the girl doesn't respond to Helen, a teddy bear is waving to her from in a picture on the wall. A last couple of details about sets and props before we move on. First, the presence of a solitary goldfish in a bowl is a great touch. These people are each trapped and alone like the goldfish, and Mother clings onto the bowl in moments of terror. So maybe the goldfish bowl is a metaphor about these people's tendency to hide within themselves rather than face up to Anthony. And the last set of prop details I really like is that there's a general metaphor about Helen nurturing Anthony, and it's presented in terms of nurturing plants. Before Anthony gets into her car, we see that Helen has a plant in her passenger seat. This emphasises that the plant is important to her. Anthony himself will become the thing that she nurtures later in the story, where his transformation is presented in the plant metaphor of blooming flowers. Note that when Anthony gets in the car with Helen at the end of the movie, he has returned to her all her belongings, but the plant is gone. Now you may think, oh come on, they just forgot about the plant prop because it wasn't important. Well, when he first got into her car, they didn't forget it because we see Anthony holding the plant during their drive. Continuing with the plant nurturing metaphor, the countryside on the way to Anthony's house is almost desert-like in terms of its leafless shrubbery. But there's plenty of green foliage outside the diner and in the background during their car chat. So why the mismatch? Well, in the barren landscape shot we can see in the background that the distant bushes aren't bare, yet all the foreground ones are. So I'd put money on it that the crew stripped the foreground bushes of their leaves to visually establish how emotionally barren and isolated Anthony's world is. In the second shot of their journey to the house we get a similar repetition. Note that there is plenty of grass and shrubbery on the far left, but all of the foreground terrain has been unearthed to appear barren, except for one little plant. This unearthing of vegetation also makes room for the wide panning shot from the road to the house. And there's also a not so healthy looking bush overlapping our view of Anthony's house. It has just a couple of budding flowers on it, and perhaps that's a foreshadow of the flower blooming yet to come. And one more note about flowers, the unusual couch design is very specifically full of flowers, all different colours, like in the film's ending, so maybe that was an intentional foreshadow as well. Oh, one more intentional detail outside the house is the presence of a squirrel eating something on top of a car. There are even squirrel calls dubbed on the soundtrack. The squirrel is an odd detail to put in the film, but they must have considered it important considering the awkwardness of setting up the shot in this way. Animals are very difficult to work with when filming. So maybe it was a foreshadow of the cartoon animals that we're about to see inside the house. Now let's look at the use of television content within the story, which consists almost exclusively of cartoon footage. I've already mentioned an instance or two where the cartoons parallel what is happening for the characters, but let's go into it in a bit more detail because it's actually quite intricate. Regarding that shot of the house exterior manifested in cartoon form, there's a really clever detail that's very easy to miss. As the cartoon is slowly zooming into the house, the camera itself is pulling away from the TV at a similar speed. This has a sort of Hitchcock's vertigo shot effect of making the cartoon house maintain a fixed size on the screen. I don't think I've ever seen a vertigo shot done in that way. Following this we cut to an old cartoon in which a cat is chilling out and is unexpectedly pounced on by a bulldog. And this parallels the lounging characters being disturbed by Anthony entering the house. A subtle hint of how he torments them regularly. This torment is illustrated with more emphasis by Anthony's sister being sat right in front of a TV, as close as her chair will get to it, as she watches the old Bimbo's Initiation cartoon. The trapped terror that Bimbo is being subjected to represents her state of permanent fear. Her eyes are wide with terror, and she can neither scream or even eat. Yet she doesn't starve, so Anthony must keep her alive through magic deliberately to punish her forever. In the next lounge scene we get more cartoon parallels. Anthony asks Helen to sit next to him as a cartoon character on the TV sits in the driving seat of a car with an empty passenger seat next to him. The cartoon then parallels the thoughts of the other captives regarding yet another person being trapped in a house.
Now you listen to me. Don't you dare bring one more thing into this house. Do you hear me? One more thing. Not one solitary single thing. Ah! A mouse!
Anna to eat junk food a cartoon character is eating, and Helen's disgust is mirrored in the cartoon action.
Another plateful.
After the scary rabbit in the hat, Helen dives for her bag, and we briefly see a cartoon character taking a dive for something too. And Anthony intimidating Ethel before he kills her is paralleled by a cartoon character pushing someone around. It's so easy to consciously miss this stuff, but it is clearly intentional. Another clever way in which the film uses old cartoons is that even when we can't see the TV sets, the cartoon sound from them is frequently used to punctuate emotional shifts in the story. The bombshell of Anthony bringing Helen into the house to be the newest captive is punctuated by the sound of a cartoon explosion, almost like a thunderclap.
How do you do?
This is Helen.
Is that right, Helen?
Here's some more examples. Pay close attention to how the cartoon audio mirrors the scene content.
Can Helen stay for supper, Mother?
Oh, no, really, I was just
Good idea.
Of course she can. Mind the step.
No, not happy birthday. No, not happy birthday.
Oh, of course, it's a birthday supper.
The TV also appears to lower in volume all by itself as Waltz prepares to do the hat trick, thus making space for Jerry Goldsmith's orchestral score to take over.
Come on, great.
Do the hat trick, Uncle Walt.
Yes, oh yes, where's the hat?
It's on the TV.
There it is. All right, go.
There are also a couple of non-cartoon uses of TV sets as well. The boxing footage in the diner scene might be a deliberate foreshadow of the forthcoming conflicts in the house. Note that Anthony is able to make the TV jump to static, and later, after he kills Ethel, the TV on the stairs behind him shows static. The timing of that is interesting. After Ethel died, the lounge TV switched itself off. So it seems like the upstairs TV was operating in parallel with it, hence it now lacks a signal. This is also the moment where Anthony is trying to drop all cartoon pretenses to tell Helen what he's really thinking. There are some more visual variations on the cartoon themes. The scribbled message saying that Anthony is a monster is written on a scrap of paper from a comic book, and all three of the cartoon cells show explosions and the word blam. That seems pretty deliberate to me, like a representation of Anthony's rage. And I of course have to give a mention to the details of the cartoon that Ethel gets trapped in. Old school special effects aside, this is one hell of a sequence. Salvador Dali would have been proud. It's got a living painting in a frame, wallpaper that turns into ghost faces, living furniture, lightning flashes in which we can see Ethel's skeleton, an omen of her death. It's got mouths within mouths, occult-like solar bodies as evil faces of insanity. It's a very complex sequence, a great little movie in itself. It's more than likely that Ethel's death sequence was inspired by the old cartoon Bimbo's Initiation, which we saw clips of upstairs in the house as a foreshadow. Now I highly recommend you check out the full version of Bimbo's Initiation on YouTube. It's fascinating and pretty goddamn creepy. It has the kind of dark nightmare surrealism found in the Twilight Zone episode itself, with some really imaginative details like the head being decapitated off of Bimbo's shadow while his actual head stays intact. Its plot involves Bimbo falling down a manhole where he finds a secret society that tries to initiate him, but he doesn't want to join, just as Helen will resist the family trying to integrate her into Anthony's lair. And the cartoon has a really interesting ending. After all Bimbo's resistance, a highly sexualized Betty Boo shows up and seduces him into joining the club, and then all the club members take off their robes, and they're all Betty Boop clones. The film was made by the Fleischer brothers, who were competitors to Disney. I'd love to know why they chose the subject matter. Maybe they were commenting on the Freemasons or some similar secret society. Oddly, they show Mickey Mouse trapping Bimbo after he falls in the manhole, likely a stab at their rival Disney. It's got the skull and crossbones and the unlucky number 13. Interesting stuff. But back to Twilight Zone itself. The use of rubbery flesh cartoon hybrids is very clever. It allows the filmmakers to show us really horrible stuff, but without it being too scary. And I have to give a shout out to special effects wizard Rob Bottin for these sequences. He was the genius behind the special effects in John Carpenter's The Thing. I'm surprised actually that the Twilight Zone episode isn't more renowned for its special effects. They really are superb. I also like the reversal factor. First put a human into a cartoon, then make a cartoon character come out of the TV. Let's now explore lighting, because this is another area where the film gets very creative. Again, the film uses a clever incremental transition approach. Coloured and unrealistic lighting is used extensively in Anthony's house to imply a cartoon reality where anything can happen. And I think this is foreshadowed in the opening diner scene where we get some coloured lighting too. Sure, it's justified by the neon lights behind the bar, but if you've ever taken part in lighting a set, you'll know that this red backlight effect would require additional lights and gels to achieve. The neon props would be unlikely to do this alone. So the coloration is most likely intentional and might well have been a hint of the more extreme, unrealistic coloration that comes later. In fact, the colour red itself becomes very significant. Lighting is all normal on the way to the house, but once inside, the blinds being drawn and resulting darkness suggest that the outside world is literally sealed off. Who has all their lights on in the daytime? Note the mismatching window light in these shots as well. From this angle, it appears that dusk is setting in outside, resulting in diffused orange sunlight coming through the window and creating an eerie rocking chair shadow. But the shot reverses and the angle of the exterior sun has changed and is now casting its light on the wall behind them. Plus, it wasn't sunset outside in the first place. So immediately we're seeing something that is physically impossible. Also impossible is the shape of the casted light. That wasn't what the windows looked like from outside. And here we see smoke or dust in the top of the room, quite creepy in itself, with the light shining in from a top window. Again, that's not what the exterior windows looked like. One thing I like about the thin bars in the window light is that it gives a sort of prism cell appearance. Remember, we get this in the hall upstairs too, and again in Anthony's sister's room. Back into the lounge, and the room lights up on its own as they enter. As the scene progresses and Helen becomes nervous, the room gently darkens between shots to usher in the horror mood. A corner of the room is suddenly lit in red, and then we're finally given a lighting continuity error which is consciously noticeable for us and the characters, the impossible spotlight that has no source of origin. A red spotlight appears from below when the monster rabbit appears, implying the creature comes from hell. The red backdrop and big shadow is a great substitute for the lack of blood and gore in the effects, and there's a mysterious blue light from the side that has suddenly appeared out of nowhere too. After the hat trick we get more of this coloured funhouse lighting and creepy shadows, such as the railing shadows here. And very briefly Anthony himself casts a big shadow up the wall here. But note that his shadow walks the wrong way. He was walking towards the TV, his shadow walks away from it. And the colour red is thematically prominent overall. After the hat trick, the room lighting appears to fade back to normal, but not quite. The red glow remains as personal conflicts ensue. It gives the whole scenario a sort of hellish look, but also seems to represent Anthony's temper on the loose. Wishing Ethel into cartoon land, a red light behind the TV directly gives him a hellish aura, and he's backlit by thunderous flashes of red as he brings the Tasmanian devil to life. His red shirt could also be thematically deliberate, but then again Helen's top is red too, so that might be incidental. The Tasmanian devil itself is lit in all kinds of creepy colour combinations as it changes form, and when it's spinning across the room the effect is given a bit more life by the fact that yellow flashes of spinning light are actually casted onto the actors. Nothing thematic there, it just looks great and gives a sense of emphasised physicality, as does the creature blowing smoke in Walt's face. And by the way, it wouldn't surprise me if Walt was named as a reference to Walt Disney. Note also here that the use of striped bar window shadows goes even more wild. They're now cast all around the room, adding further to that sense of being in a prison cell. And in Anthony's final moment of stating that he hates the house and wishes it away, the whole set becomes bathed in deep hellish red, after which the release of these emotions switches to a soft white light and then a warm sunrise ending. So light is used very effectively throughout the film to convey changes in emotional tone. Last point on lighting, TV light is used thematically too. The bluish coloration here enhances the notion of Sarah struggling for breath, and it's used to dramatically light Anthony from below when he kills Ethel. The TV switches itself off automatically, but the dramatic lighting of Anthony's face magically remains. Next up, yes, there's yet more to explore in this episode. Next up we have cinematography, and by that I'm specifically referring to camera positions and movement, being that people understandably confuse lighting and set design with cinematography. Once again we get an incremental transition approach. The shots are mostly straightforward for the first half of the episode. Efficient use of shot sizes, but nothing unusual until we get that vertigo shot of the cartoon house that I mentioned earlier. As the family have supper and Anthony gets annoyed with them being dishonest, a subtlety in how Anthony is filmed is introduced. His face begins being shot from low angles to make him seem imposing, even though he is the shortest person in the room. This low angle approach is used frequently as Anthony becomes more menacing, but the cast are also positioned and framed to be physically lower than him. For example, the stairs are used to place Anthony highest in the room, king that he is, and they're used to place him slightly higher than eye level with Ethel as he stares at her with hatred. Height and low angles are also used to make the monster rabbit more imposing. Helen then scrambles to pick up her belongings off the floor, and we get more high and low angles to establish Anthony's dominance. Interrogating the family about the Anthony is a monster message, the family are positioned in chairs so that he is the tallest and most dominant one. And even when he approaches the much taller Ethel with the intention of killing her, low angles of him are used again. Both a low angle and the swift movement towards his face so that he fills up the frame are used to give him a bit more menace as he wishes her into the TV. These camera work subtleties are used to offset Anthony's small physical stature, and just to drive the point home, the huge eye outside the door suggests that Anthony has become god-sized. He must be at least 300 feet tall here. An added subtlety is the vertical stretching of his eye. It helps make the eye visually fit within the vertical door space, but it also suggests that Anthony himself is stretched out to be even taller. Another cinematography technique used extensively is camera tilting. The vast majority of movies do not use deliberate tilting in any of their shots, and that's because most movies are trying to be based more or less in reality. It's a strange aspect of our perception of movies. We tilt our heads frequently in real life, yet our brains somehow compensate so that everything always feels horizontally balanced. But because movies are hard framed at the edges with no peripheral vision, the tilting of camera angles is quite jarring to us. So filmmakers tend to limit their use of camera tilts to situations where they want to create a sense of disorientation or unreality. This Twilight Zone episode waits until Helen is trying to leave the house before making its first use of camera tilts, and it introduces it subtly and briefly enough to be felt but not noticed. It's used when the fake parents are getting nervous, their faces mostly filling the frame and the tilted background out of focus. The next tilt comes after the hat trick, but this time it's combined with a high angle so as not to be too noticeable either. So we're getting a gradual introduction of tilted shots, and it's only after Ethel dies on the TV that the film goes wild with its use of camera tilts, because reality for Helen has now completely broken down. Note the jarring switches between left and right tilting between shots. It reminds me of how Hitchcock filmed his famous Psycho shower scene with jarring camera angles. And these tilts continue as Anthony explains and then demonstrates his magical powers. Last cinematography related point, there are three major instances in which the fourth wall of the film is broken by characters looking directly into the camera. The first is Ethel when she is sent into the cartoon. But she's breaking the fourth wall within the film itself, which is a bit of a mindfuck, as she can obviously see her own viewers, the other characters. But the other two instances are when Anthony displays his powers with the most intensity. Here he is wishing the Tasmanian Devil to come to life, and he is definitely looking into the camera at us, as if he's so godlike he's even aware of the film itself. In the same shot, the camera is also viewing him from the point of view of the TV set. That's very unusual. And the second instance of Anthony doing this is when he wishes the house away. The camera is moving and his eyes are following it. That is absolutely deliberate, and it gives emotional power to his words. He is talking right at us.
I hate this house. I wish it away. I wish it all away.
So after the house disappears, it's like he and Helen have stepped right out of the narrative entirely, right out of the film that they were in a moment ago. And regarding this sequence, I must make a mention of editing. The film as a whole is superbly edited, but this sequence is very original. The simple editing trick of having two pieces of the same dialogue footage overlap each other is extremely unusual. It establishes that not only have Anthony and Helen gone to another place spatially, but also that time no longer has any specific reference point. It's like they've stepped out of the universe itself. Now this kind of overlap works here specifically because there are no sets, just smoke. And having footage of smoke overlap itself is fine because it just gives the impression of, well, thicker smoke. And the gradual return of reality and bonding of Helen and Anthony is simply but cleverly conveyed by the camera moving in towards the subjects as they sort of find each other in the smoke, at which point the overlapped footage fades away. So, time now has meaning again. The sound's interesting here too. There are two sets of dialogue as there is visual footage, but each dialogue track is echoed in itself.
It's not fair. You're supposed to be happy when your wishes come true. You're supposed to be happy when your wishes come true.
However, the repetition of dialogue is used selectively instead of continuously, so Anthony's gripe is emphasised with the two lines of dialogue being played with equal volume. But only some parts of their dialogue are repeated, with certain words being heard only once.
Anthony, take us back. Take us back.
So by cutting in and out of the second dialogue track, it allows the dialogue to flow in a way where we can very clearly understand the conversation. But the mismatches in the second dialogue track also add to the sense of unreality. So again, that's an unusual piece of editing. Now, I've always found this sequence very powerful, and when studying it for this video, I felt like there was something else going on that I was missing, and I had to watch the clip about half a dozen times before I finally noticed what it was. The two pieces of overlapping footage are not the same take. They are different takes, but they're filmed almost identically in terms of actor movements and camera angles and dialogue. It's hard to get your head around, but the very subtle differences between the two takes can be noticed when Anthony's dialogue repeats with identical volume. Both the angle of his face and the intonation of the dialogue are slightly different between the two shots.
It's not fair. You're supposed to be happy when your wishes come true. You're supposed to be happy when your wishes come true.
So I think that really adds to the sense of unreality of being in a timeless place, or even of parallel realities where the same things are happening over and over, but not exactly in the same way. Superb. Okay, we're not far off finishing now, so let's further explore sound and music. The film hugely benefits from Jerry Goldsmith's score, who, by the way, is my favourite composer of all time. As always, Goldsmith is able to hit all the right notes in terms of emotional subtext and scene transitions. The build-up music in the hat trick scene, for example, is excellent. But he also does some really clever stuff in terms of incorporating cartoon melodies so as to gently offset the horrific monsters. With The Rabbit, for example, we hear whistles and car horns mixed in with the sinister orchestral notes. And he goes wild with the cartoon melodies for the Tasmanian Devil sequence, speeding them up to insanity level. In contrast to this, he goes for a more traditional horror music approach for Ethel's death scene, probably because the terror was already offset by the cartoon visuals anyway. But something else I like here is that there's a vagueness as to how much of the music is coming from the actual TV that Ethel is trapped in and how much is the actual film score. Some of the basic sound effects are really good too, like the Mad Doctor's voice and the various monster growls.
We've been expecting you.
Even the eye screams at Helen like a giant mouth. And I noticed an interesting use of breathing sounds. When we see Sarah's face, we hear what sounds like an iron lung, thus emphasising her breathing problems. But it seems to be part of Goldsmith's musical score because we hear the same breathing noise when we see the faceless family portrait.
Anthony?
And strangely, we hear it again after Helen sees the screaming guy.
I can't help it, Helen. I don't want to hurt anybody.
Maybe she's now worried that she'll end up like the sister. That's something I quite like about Goldsmith's score. There are aspects of it that basically serve as both sound effects and music. A few words now about acting. Due to the overall unreality of the film, it's important to have a good cast who make the emotional aspects of the story convincing. And this is a key area where a lot of horror movies fail. So these actors are pretty good at appearing nervous or terrified. Kathleen Quinlan, who plays Helen, did a good job in this respect too. She's breathing heavily and sweating and holds her stomach as if her guts are trembling. She really gives that sense of someone desperately trying to cling on to reality as she leans against doors and walls for stability, which works nicely with the tilted camera angles too. I also got the general impression from the other actors that there are bits of ad-libbing going on, like when Walt and Ethel stroll around Helen looking her up and down, and there's Mother's weird act of smacking Helen on the hand. Like semi-aggressive. Although Walt acts convincingly nervous during the hat trick, it's odd that when the monster rabbit is on screen his composure changes, as if he's proud to have summoned the beast. It might not mean anything, but I find it interesting anyway. A detail about Anthony also, and by the way this kid is a great actor, he does a really good job in this. This particular point is not exactly an acting issue, but I didn't know where else to mention it in this video, so I'll just put it here. His face goes blank when he summons the Tasmanian Devil to life. Combined with the video game noises and the blue light on his face, it makes him seem like a cold supercomputer. Okay, so that rounds up my analysis of the film, and boy, that was a long and detailed one. It is amazing how much they crammed into this film. So, who were the team that created this magnificently crafted Twilight Zone episode? Well, Steven Spielberg was on production duties, and it's possible that, like with Poltergeist, his production guidance spilled over into the direction of the film. Having an experienced director as a producer seems to be something that works with a lot of films. But at the same time, the director Joe Dante, who directed the episode, has proven himself on occasion to be very talented. He made Gremlins, for example, which successfully bounced back and forth between horror and comedy, and he made The Howling, which was excellent, as well as the marvellous social satire, The Burbs. So Joe Dante certainly isn't a lightweight, and I'd say his directorial skills rival Spielberg in the commercial sense, yet he's not so very well known by name. Gremlins should have made him a star director, but unfortunately the film was marketed as Steven Spielberg Presents. Going by Joe Dante's Fangoria interview, it seems that he got quite heavily involved with conceiving the Twilight Zone episode in collaboration with credited screenwriter Richard Matheson, and he explains that he went out of his way to make the episode as different to the old black and white one as possible, so that old Twilight Zone fans wouldn't realise which episode was being remade until halfway through. And that's the right approach to remakes. Do something different, introduce new themes and ideas. Don't just redo the thing with today's technical cliches. It's also possible that the presence of Spielberg, John Landis and George Miller, who made the Mad Max films, as the directors of the other episodes, may have made the comparatively unknown Joe Dante up his game, like he was the newcomer trying to keep up with the big boys. But rather than just keep up with Landis and Spielberg, Dante's episode knocked the hell out of their efforts. Dante was also schooled in filmmaking by Roger Corman, whose unorthodox get-the-job-done filmmaking techniques helped kickstart the careers of directors like James Cameron. The cinematographer on this episode was John Hoare, who had previously teamed up with Dante when making The Howling. So it seems that a good artistic relationship had already been established between director and cinematographer. It's worth noting that in his interview, Dante explains that he wanted the episode to end with the sound of thunder as Helen and Anthony drive away, an indication that he will eventually revert to anger. But in the finished film, the shot fades to black before the thunder is heard, so we end up attributing the thunder to the next episode about the gremlin on the plane. Dante may have been disappointed with that, but personally I quite like the vagueness of which episode the thunder is referring to. Joe Dante also had a lot of experience as an editor, which always helps with directing. However, Tina Hirsch is credited as editing the episode, and it's more than likely that Dante sat with her working on the edit. Tina also edited the classic Walter Hill movie The Driver, and she worked again with Dante on Gremlins. So a good collaborative trio of director, cinematographer and editor appears to be the core of what made this film so great, topped up with Rob Bottin's special effects, Jerry Goldsmith's score, a great cast and no doubt some committed set designers. So why isn't this film hailed as a classic? Why isn't it used to teach filmmaking techniques in film schools? Well, the fact that it's an episode within a 4-piece film in which only one other episode rivaled it for quality is undoubtedly a factor. Twilight Zone the movie has had its reputation marred by the inconsistent quality between its episodes, but also because of that horrible helicopter crash accident that occurred when filming the John Landis episode. Some critics said that the whole movie shouldn't have been released at all because of the deaths. I don't personally agree with that, even though I don't think much of the John Landis episode itself. But maybe if that particular tragic episode had been dropped and replaced with a totally different one, it may have helped with the overall film's quality and reputation. Okay, so this video turned out to be about 3 times longer than I was intending, thanks to the intricacy of the film, but I hope you enjoyed it all anyway. If you want more, then make sure to check out my backlog of videos and articles on my site, collativelearning.com. Make sure to subscribe to me if you're new to my work. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook.